It felt like a bolt of lightning, and it literally felt like God touched me.
Eshwar Segobind's amazing story of awakening to true identity.
One of the things with me at that time was anger. I saw an anger management therapist in there.
Eshwar was in the process of being treated for a long, troubled past.
When I came out of the treatment facility, I stayed at a recovery house. And during that time is when some of the other realizations came.
Look closely, and you'll see that Eshwar is sitting in his truck where his life changed in an instant.
One in particular was it was me sitting in the truck. It felt like a bolt of lightning came from the earth, through my feet, up through my body, out the top of my head. And it literally felt like God touched me on my brain and it just shook.
And from that moment on, nothing was the same.
It was just like utter silence. The thinking mechanism I was at that time just kind of stopped. It's almost like the system got flashed, hard drive just got flashed out of the idea of me and all these ideas that I had.
Who is Eshwar?
And what is his life like today?
I have some friends, but there's nothing that I see of value. Not that I judge conversations of value, but this is the only thing that I speak about in lengths. And it's the only thing that's really worth talking about. Nothing else.
Eshwar Segobind. He calls himself a spiritual seeker, comes from a Hindu background, works as an electrician, and says realizing the illusory self and the idea of a separate self is key for him. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded on April 27th, 2024, in Philadelphia and Coronado, California.
Welcome to Souljourns, Eshwar Segobind. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I guess the first question I'd like to ask you is where in the world of spiritual thought, spiritual processing, spiritual evolution do you sit today in experience?
I'm in Pennsylvania, so well, I'll give you a location. I would say probably the closest thing to that would be present. I'm the same place everybody's at. It's where we are when we drop away all of our concepts of what we think all of this is about and where we need to get to. And that place is readily accessible for everyone. It's when we jump from here to here. That's it.
Give me some of the words that might distinguish one of those places from the other place.
It's a process when we're caught up in this dream of mind and thoughts and ideas and concepts that we have this running movie inside of our head that we're engaged with, that we're veiled from what's right in front of our eyes. The funny part of all of this is when it's seen, you already know it. That's why you're laughing, because you've deluded yourself thinking that it's something other than your present experience. But for some reason, when we're on the path, we won't accept our present experience as being it. That's as much as I can really say about it.
You awaken to the truth of who you are is the phrase I would use. You might use a different one. In a incredibly short period of 1 year of time while you were in rehab. I think if I read correctly, it was for alcoholic rehab.
Hmm.
And it's an amazing story since I've never heard of anybody coming to self-understanding of genuine truth on that route before. Can you shed some more light on it?
When I got to the treatment facility, the thing that changed was I was here. Let me see what this thing is about at the facility. The key thing was I didn't need to engage with anything in life. While I was in there, I had to just do what it is that they were saying and just work on myself to see what was what needed to be fixed. And the thing that came through early on was outside of all of this work, outside of all of the stuff that I was doing before with making money, running the business, and doing normal life stuff, um, I had no idea who and what I was
Mhm.
outside of all of that. I like
Yeah.
my intention was so focused in on that daily activity, that drive to want to be something, to achieve something, to gain and get, that it was full blinders on and nothing else mattered. It wouldn't even be brought into my consciousness or awareness to even consider that there was anything else outside of whatever that present mode of experience was. And in that place, it paused all of that. It was like, all right, put all of that aside. The phone was down, the emails were down. I didn't have anything to do with work. Even my family at that time, because you know, to be in the treatment facility, things had to get pretty bad to kind of step aside from life itself to kind of figure out what was going on with me. And it wasn't something that was done willingly. It was situations that occurred that prompted that to happen. And when I was in that place, it was, I had no idea, nothing whatsoever, no concept of what am I outside of all of that. And that's where it really started, because life that I knew paused, and then there was all of this stuff that was here that I had no idea about, none whatsoever.
I haven't come to the place you are. I'm still working on it. But I've always been grateful that that lit the fire of trying to understand more about truth. So take us now a couple of steps forward after you've became aware of that point, and maybe you wrestled with it, maybe you didn't. How did it progress to awakening to your own truth?
So in the facility itself, there were a couple of things that occurred. Um, so the only thing I knew about spirituality at the time, being Hindu, was the symbol, the Om symbol, and the particular part was the crescent with the dot. That kind of captivated me. So when I was inside the facility itself, we used to go to this gazebo thing where we would sit and smoke at the time, and they had this giant uh planter's pot that had sand in it. So I used to take the sand and draw an Om on the floor. And the thing that captivated me was the crescent with the dot. And like my entire attention would just kind of focus in on that, and there would just be the stillness. That was my introduction to meditation when I was in the facility itself. It was just this stillness that was there. I don't know what it was, but something in me was just focused on that. That was the only thing I knew. It was like when all of my ideas of being and life and living and all of that kind of went away. There was this intuitive part that kind of took over. And that's what came up. It was just sit and relax on that image as I drew it out. And there was just this stillness that opened up. One of the things with me at that time was anger. And I saw anger management therapist in there. And the first thing that really hit was when I realized resentments, what the structure of that was and how I was causing them. And I could just stop. And when I stopped, it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. And that was almost the block of the entirety of my experience as being this person that was engaging in this world through that means of perception, which is engaging in some kind of self-protection mechanism. When I came out of the treatment facility, I stayed at a recovery house in Lancaster County for the duration of my time up there, up until I believe it was August of that year. And during that time is when some of the other realizations came. One in particular was it's a Shakti type of energetic awakening or experience that happened. And it was me sitting in the truck, and I was going through these meditation practices. It was 112 steps of Shiva, and you could, pick one, try it out, see what it, how it works for you, and all of that stuff. I believe it was number 5 that I was just kind of focused on, and it felt like a bolt of lightning came from the earth, through my feet, up through my body, out the top of my head, and it literally felt like God touched me on my brain, and it just shook. And I went inside the recovery house, and it was like a reset. It was There was like no conception whatsoever. Everything was here. There was just no ideas engaging with anything as being something. And when I went inside the house, I thought I was looking at the wall for, like 5 minutes. Some of the guys was like, you were standing there for about 45 minutes. But
Really?
it was just like utter silence, and everything was just moving. But the thinking mechanism, or however I was at that time, um, just kind of stopped, paused, and that was the energetic side of the pausing this entire system. It's almost like the system got flashed, like an ECU, like a computer hard drive just got flashed out of the idea of me and all these ideas that I had. And throughout my experience, it's been really interesting because any which direction that I would want to go into to see what this is about, it lends itself and it opens up in that way, whether it's energetic, it's physical, whether it's contemplation. It comes from all different angles. So I'm left with no place to go and hide, and also no place to take a stand.
I've not heard a story quite like this before. Were you shocked? Did it make a difference in your life? Did you have to come to grow to know how to use this experience in a way that would be useful to you?
I really didn't know much about spirituality. I didn't know much about these circles and the concepts that were used, and non-duality and all of this stuff. I had no clue about. So as I was going through step work on the 12-step program, um, that's also a pretty spiritual process in itself, because it empties the individual of the conceptions of themselves. And towards the end, you do have a type of awakening, which is, freedom from the bondage of self as you go through the process step by step. So that also aid in this. So as I was doing my step work, I started to see how identity was intertwined with the character of Ishwar, the character of a dad, the character of a son. All these are different personality types. And the identity was, I was a son to my mom, I was a husband to my wife, I was a friend to my friends, and each one of them had like a different name. But the thing that really hit was they're all just ideas.
So they're all character types, as you said. They're just ideas. And I understand and relate to everything you're saying. Uh, you're an electrician, you're a husband, sounds like you're a father, sounds like I
Mhm.
know you're a son. Those are all labels, those are all correct labels, but they don't identify Eshwar. Who is Eshwar?
There is no Ishwar. As we go through this, we just see the processes for what's happening and how the processes are misinterpreted. It can feel as though that there's a self here. It's a misapprehension of our experience because we're not seeing our experience exactly for what it is. It doesn't mean that you do away with the self, but until you experience that there isn't a self, then you don't know what that is. The identity with that self is all that you ever know. Our attention is focused on our idea of ourself so intently that it becomes the entirety of our experience, when really and truly it's an aspect of our experience.
Where did you go with that? Did it make sense to you? Were you further confused or enlightened?
The experience, the cessation experience, is the self-knowing experience. So I started to go back in memory of how I remembered myself. And I started at my current age that I was at the time. And then I went back to when I was 24, which is when I first moved out to Philadelphia. And then when I was 17, then 9, which was when we first came to the States. And I got back to a memory when I was about 4 or 5 years old. But the memory itself wasn't important, but the time frame was. So at 4 or 5, I had this memory of me. And I was like, but I'm 4 and 5. So what was there before that? What was there before 4 years old? And I just stayed with that. I was laying down in my bed, and it was like, I don't know what the Buddha is talking about. I don't know what Eckhart Tolle is talking. I don't know what anybody's talking about when it comes to this stuff. The only thing I know is my current experience, and outside of myself, I don't accept any of that because they're all conception.
Mhm.
So the thing that I'm holding to myself is my memory. So let me go in there and let me see what's there. And I focused on my breath. I just zoned in. I was laying in my bed and I was just ready to see. I was curious to know what was there. And it felt like my mind was pushing against something. And then this image of this 4-year-old came up of me. And I was looking at it, and then it turned like this. And behind the face was completely hollow. And the minute that was seen, the entire mind, it felt like a rubber band was being pulled like this, and then it just cut. It just snapped, and everything unraveled. It just blipped out, and it showed exactly how I was just deluding myself in the entire manifestation itself. First, there is something that just cannot be spoken about. You can't even say it's nothing. Then this sense, then a sense of, then a sense of me or I, and then the entire manifestation comes. Experience is experiencing experience. There isn't an experiencer. And slowly the sense of self comes into place, and it all kind of coalesced back into day-to-day life with that experience showing the delusion of me.
Did you say, did I hear you correctly, at the age of 4, when you were observing your 4-year-old self, looking at the face of your 4-year-old self, it turned and you were able to see behind it nothing, that nothing was
It was
there?
nothing. It was empty. It was hollow. There wasn't anything whatsoever. It was the idea inside of my mind was the of this self, the image that I had is the point of division, the point of which the mind created the identity to engage with in this world. Prior to that, the construct of the mind has no idea what exists before that. So the mechanism itself, it pushed into a place that it cannot go. So it dropped. In an instant, it dropped. In an instant, everything was known. This person, this identity, this thing, this mechanism, this whatever person that was here that was saying that it's Ishwar, and a complete fabrication.
Do you know that you're that distinctly different from most people on this path, if you want to call it that?
I don't think so. I'm nobody special. Everyone has the capacity for this. Like I say this all the time. I was a drunk that got into all kinds of shenanigans that led me into a treatment facility, and all those things I'm grateful for, because all of those things were important. They brought me to the point of pause. So I don't regret any of them, nor do I have any kind of affinity for all of it. They're just things that happen, but I'm no different than anybody else. I was curious, and when I was looking, I had no expectations because I didn't know what I was going to see. And if I didn't know what I was going to see, I wasn't going to make anything up either.
What were the people around you? Some were, I'm sure, well educated and well experienced in working in rehab. Did they understand who you were becoming, and how you were different from the old Eshwar? Were they able to advise you correctly?
In treatment, I mean, most of the in AA in general, there are a lot of people who have come to these understanding by going through that process in itself, because they're disillusioning themselves as they're going through with their identity because of what they think of themselves. So there were people who have a lot of insight. My sponsor was, and I think one of the things that he saw um, was how things were kind of unfolding with me, and he stepped back and he allowed it to be. But I also spoke with him, you know, all of the time, so he knew what I was doing, and uh, what I was going through. So I think him seeing, certain traits, I should say, he knew on how to guide me.
Mhm.
So that was pretty important, I think, in the beginning, to for him to hold the space for me, to allow me to kind of walk through on my own, even though he was holding my hand. I don't think I knew he was at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Let's cover some of the basics here before we go too much farther. How old are you today, Eshwar?
I'm 42.
Sounds like you've got a family of a couple of youngsters in the house.
Yes, I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old.
And how old were you when you were in rehab?
It was in 2017, so that was
Okay,
about 5 years ago,
yeah.
two,
So you've
6 years.
covered the territory in those 5 years. How would you assess your level? We all have anger. How would you assess your level of anger today compared to before this happened?
I would say 98% reduction in all of that.
98%. That's
Mhm.
pretty overwhelming. Tell me about the site of the interview today. It's not in a studio, it's not in a home, it's not in a an office, it's in your truck, which
Yes,
play a very important role in your life. And tell me why.
most of the work that was done when I was even when I was at the recovery house, it was always in my truck. So I remember the first time I was doing like shadow work, and I didn't know that's what it was called. I didn't know it was shadow work, but I was going through all these emotions, stuff that was buried throughout my entire life, and it was time to address them. Did I know that's what I was doing? I didn't know. I just went in my truck, I sat, and this silence thing that was there has always been there. I just kind of listened into that and allow all of them to come up. And as they came up, if I needed to cry, I would cry. If rarely did I really needed to yell or scream. Most of the time, it was a little kid inside of me that just didn't grow up and it was hurting. So I kind of like stuffed them in a closet and buried them under all these emotions. So it was letting these emotions out. And all of that was inside of my truck. Even the energetic experience that occurred happened in here when I was sitting and I was focusing on breathing, and it felt like it wasn't me that was breathing. It happened in this truck. Mornings I would go and sit, oddly enough, at a power plant inside the truck, and I would feel my fingertips, and I started to feel when I realized I was feeling my fingerprint itself, the ridges. That's when I knew I was fully conscious and aware, and I was like, oh, it was all in the truck. But everything was waking me up to what's already here, reality itself, unfiltered.
You sound like you've come from some pretty gifted parents with a high IQ and good intelligence, and they passed those genes on to you, and you've come quite a ways with your own education. How much has your upbringing instilled this level of wisdom in you that I see today?
Educational level, I went to high school. That was about it. There's a level of intelligence that functions when, for me, I know when I step back, it just solves everything. And I think that's just an aspect of our mind itself as being a problem solver, because there are no problems, there are only solutions. And I think once I understood that, there was no real limitations when it came to anything that I would want to do or engage with. But my level of education went to high school. I think I had a semester of college, and I didn't like it. It was boring. Um, I was pretty good in high school. I had some advanced classes, and uh, I was horrible at basic arithmetic, but I loved algebra and calculus. So that stuff, I don't know, I did well with it.
Yeah.
So, and trigonometry, geometry, and all of that, sciences. I was horrible in chemistry. I really liked physics. Um, but I think there are natural intelligences that we have that we just take off with. But I was able to navigate and engage in this world in different ways that really didn't need really a whole lot of effort on my end,
Well, it's easy to
honestly.
see your natural gifted intelligence, but the question to me would be, is it necessary for a person to have this degree of bright understanding in order to comprehend the truth of who they really are, as opposed to who they think they are?
No, I think everybody has if they have the faculty of mind to stay and be with themselves and introspect inwards, then that's all that they need.
So how many people get you, Eshwar? How many people who are at all curious about the transformation that's taken place in your life understand really what happened?
Not many.
What do you say to them? Do you try to convince them? You try to make them understand?
Mm-mm. No, no, no. Mm-mm. one of the nice things about this, I think, is when I've like going through the process in the entirety up until this point, is when people approach, I can kind of gauge and see where they're at. And generally, if somebody is ready to hear something, that's when they would reach out to me. Usually people don't come out of the blue, that's not really ready to hear what's being offered. And sometimes, um, when people really push, I kind of refrain from saying certain things to them because it can be destabilizing, uh, to know that potentially the very way that you're taking yourself to be as this existent individual engaging in this world isn't.
Why you?
I don't know. It was. I was curious. I was curious without reservations, and I remember when I was staying at the recovery house. Behind the house, there's like a foresty kind of area, and I used to work in the night. So when we came back from AA meetings and stuff, it was late and it was dark, and there wasn't much lighting back there, and you could always hear like rustling in the woods, and it would freak me out. Like I remember this fear came up inside of me, and while I was doing this stuff, it was like, what are you afraid of? What is what is fear? What's that whole thing about? And I was like, hmm, I'm afraid of my projection of what I think is in the woods. And it's one thing to analyze that within yourself. It's a different thing to step into the woods to find out. And one night I was like, you know what? Enough. And I just ran into the woods and nothing happened. And I'm sure there was deers and stuff back there, which there are, but it wasn't what I was projecting out to be there. When I was going back and back in my mind, those were the things that came up. There were fear, fear of death, fear of what I would find, fear of the initial thing. It felt like I was taking a leap, and initially when I got afraid, it pulled me back from the edge, and I had to take a leap, and it literally felt like I was just diving into nothing. And when I took the leap into it, um, and I went with the fear, I wasn't fighting it. I was like, all right, I'm afraid, but I do want to see what's on the other side because I understand if I get afraid and I pull back, I'm only pulling back of what I think is on the other side and not confirming what's really there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm believing a concept of what this fear is telling me, and that's why it's afraid. So I told the fear, all right, you don't know, and I don't know. So I'm not going to believe what you're making up. Neither should you. So let's go hand in hand and go see. And that was it.
I've seen in some of the interviews that you've given, my feeling was that they were very bright people, creative people, but they didn't really get what you were saying. Did you feel that?
I generally don't think whether they know or they understand where I'm coming from, um, because I really don't make that judgment about anyone, or it doesn't come up like that. We just have a discussion and we just kind of
Yeah.
mosey on along.
So let's go down the list a little bit further then. What about your parents, assuming they're both alive? Do they understand their son?
My mom and dad, they're still around. The alleviation, I think they see uh, the change from how things were before to how things are now. And really, all of the chaos has gone away,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
opened up to me being able to look my dad and tell him I love him, and that was something that was never a thing before. And my mom looked at me and she had said, "Oh, I have my son back." And we've had deeper discussions about the alleviation of the identity and all of that. And I never really directly asked them how they feel or what they feel about it. But I think, given how things were when I was drinking to how they are now, they're deeply relieved.
Have they noticed the 98% reduction in anger?
I don't know. I never really asked. I know they know that I'm a much calmer person.
Yeah.
and I'm able to relate with them a lot more and more compassionately. But I don't know if they noticed 98% reduction.
I don't know that you're married. If so, how does your wife figure you out these days?
I told her that, you know, when I'm out working, you don't exist.
Maybe
The
wrong
wife,
to say.
definitely not the correct thing to say uh, early on. So they're maturing of insights that come with that as well, because what's true for me is only true for me. It's not an experience that should be imposed on others. With her too, it's not something that I should impose on her as though for her to understand where I'm coming from, because those understandings are for me. Because I'm the one that had the experience and it's showing me. It's not to impose that on her. Now, as we've you know, time has passed, she has gone through her own type of awakening processes, and
Uh,
uh, came to the understanding and seeing no self, and um, how that kind of plays out for her.
how do you view suffering in others?
Well,
Is it real?
as for me viewing that as suffering, that would mean I would have to make an imposition and an assumption of what somebody else is experiencing when I don't know. I can only know the experience for myself of what suffering was for me and how it alleviated itself from me. And it was when I released the idea of the one that suffers.
What about suffering of a loved one, a coworker, a parent?
Oh, we've gone through all of that. Um, my nephew, he's 7. He Christmas Eve, he went into the hospital for a stomach ache. He went in for a tummy ache, and 11 days he passed. They found a rare genetic cancer that went from stage 1 to 4 in a few days, and he passed. It's felt, and then it was like, where did he go? That's all I ever knew, was my own conception of what he is. My 9-year-old, she was born with a rare genetic condition. Um, in all of, I think they said all of documented medical history, there was only like 66 cases, and she has an array of health issues. And one of the things was, when I went into understanding all of this, was maybe this spiritual path and mysticism, I would find something that I could miraculously heal her with. And that wasn't the case. The case was nothing needed to be fixed here. Just
You,
just my perception of what I think is happening versus what's actually happening. It needed correction. It was a misunderstanding and interpretation of what's happening, as though this world needs fixing.
do you even today have any interest in following any of the great teachers, Ramana Maharshi, um, Sai Baba, A Course in Miracles, which brought non-duality to the West, to Philadelphia? Or do you find complete satisfaction in knowing that you're on the only path that matters?
I guess it's best to describe the only practice that I do, um, which is the understanding of how the self came into being as a misapprehension of the sense perceptions themselves. So in Buddhist thought, there is the sutta called the Bahya Sutta, which states, uh, in the seen, only the seen. In the hearing, there's no hearer, there's only sounds. In seeing, there are only colors, or just the seen. Um, in thinking, there are only thoughts. So it's not a denial of any of our experience or sensory perceptions. It's a full acceptance of them, but seeing them at their basis without this interpretation of thought. This thing that weaves the sense perception together, that gives rise to this sense of self as being me, experiencing something that's inside this body in this exterior world. So it's just remaining and breaking down my sensory perception back at their basis. And that can only be done here. All of meditation was to open up now and to boot us up from this mind space here that all of our attention was caught up, by not necessarily stopping thoughts, but just seeing them for what they are. And there's no thinker behind them. There's no feeler. It brings out this observer that we feel that's somewhere, but we can't really find it. And even that too is just it's a process. It's a misapprehension. And then, it can run into awareness. Oh, well, I'm awareness. Well, that's also a process too. All I know is when somebody comes and they ask, generally having a discussion with them, it's easy to see where they're at. Some people need compassion and guidance. Some people just, you know, maybe relax a little bit, take a breath. This is all the meditation was about, to focus you and still and observe for a second. There's seeing, there's hearing, there's observing, there's awareness. There are all these things that are here. There's thinking that's here. You as you take yourself, you're also here. Everybody wants to see the ultimate, but they don't want to accept themselves. That's where it starts. This self thing that everybody wants to throw away and get rid of. It's through that. That's the gateway. That's the gateless gate. You come to you to see all of this. Nowhere else. You're only found here and now, present, conscious, and aware. What is that outside of concepts?
I don't know how I found out about you. You're not prominently marketed. There's no advertising. Word of mouth is still fairly minimal. Something caught my eye to something on Google one day, and I thought he might make an interesting interview. You don't know me from the man in the moon. Why did you say yes to my invitation?
Whoever comes, they come. They're put in place here so we can have a discussion, and whatever is born out of that discussion is for everyone. It has nothing to do with me or anyone else. It's like the channel opens up and the information flows, and that's it. Most of the time I say, if not all the time, I say yes to everyone when it comes to this, because this is the only thing. I don't really talk to anyone else. I have some friends, but there's nothing that I see of value. Not that I judge conversations of value, but this is the only thing that I speak about in lengths. And it's the only thing that's really worth talking about. Nothing else. Everything else is, when am I going to have a discussion about work? Those are certain systems that I have to engage in throughout the day. It's necessary, not for for me, but for my family, because there are things I need to engage with so they don't suffer. Just because I've come to these understanding and I can treat myself like this and go sit in the mountains, if I do that, I create suffering for them. So it's a recognition and maturing of your own insights that you do what's necessary for others. And that's all it's ever. That was the whole gambit. It's not about me. There isn't anything here. It's about everyone else. And even though that's a subtle assumption that there's something that's called others, going through the process, we know what the error is. And it's only about others. That's all it could ever be about.
Coming from the background you spring from, you would understand this better probably than me, but there's a new word for what you're talking about, Dharma. Dharma, your duty. You've got to provide a roof over your head. You've got to bring home some money to buy food for your daughter, for your two children, for your wife, for yourself. Is it okay if I ask the name of your 9-year-old daughter?
Leela, the divine play.
We better not leave out your other child. Is it a daughter
Uh,
or a boy?
I have two daughters. So her name is Tara.
Okay. Well, my hope is that your whole family, and maybe especially for the moment, Leela, gets to the age where she understands her dad even better by your many, many from the heart answers to these questions today. And I thank you very much for being willing to go the extra mile with this interview, Eshwar.
Thank you for having me. These I think solidifies the at least some or maybe a different way of it being expressed, where it becomes available to others like them. I do that's one of the things that I'll make recordings and stuff on my phone of videos that's specifically for them, that one day when I'm, you know, evaporated out of here, they can go through my phone and find these little nuggets in there for them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just been a complete delight, Eshwar. Many, many thanks. God bless you. And I hope to do it again with you one day, an interview, as even more seasoning takes place in your life. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy your day.